Hello, everyone. How are we all doing today? Welcome to the 2022 Community Industry Report, AMA. I'm here today with Jen, one of our communiteers, and we are so excited. How you doing today, Jen?
Hey, I'm good. This is the afternoon here for me, but I'm sure everybody's waking up. I'm super excited to be here. I feel like one of these events is like the awards. It's like we get to see how far we've come as a community together. And that means it only gets better.
Definitely. Well, we've seen a lot of responses with the icebreaker question. Thanks, Matt. I saw that salary tidbit. Love that. If you just joined and haven't had a chance to answer, please do so now. We would love to know your favorite tidbit from what the report is. Also, before we get started, I wanted to try something a little new here. For everyone that is attending a CMX event for the first time, please drop your favorite emoji in the chat. And everyone else that's here, let's give them a warm emoji applause welcome. Let's see what we're coming in hot with that. All right. We will work on that. First timers, drop the emojis. Okay. So running through the agenda today, right now, you're at the intro with Jen and myself. Woo woo! In a few minutes here, we'll be bringing out David Spinks, who will run through the report findings. Yay! After going through the report, we will open up the floor to your questions for all your AMA needs. However, please, just as a reminder, please post your questions as they come up. And finally, we will wrap with some networking in the networking tab located at the top of your screen.
All right, so now let's go towards some housekeeping before we get started. So as you can see here right in front of you, please use the stage chat tab. Ask any question using the Q&A as well. It's located one over from the stage chat. Any questions that you think are super interesting and you want an answer to, go ahead and upvote that question. And we'll be asking questions that are upvoted, so be sure to do that if you want your question asked. Close any distracting applications because we want your full attention. This is like the big event of the year, and David has worked really hard on this. Next, make sure as well that, just so you know, the event will be recorded, so if you come late or if you need to leave early, don't worry, we will have it posted on our YouTube channel. And we do have one pro tip. That Bevy Virtual works best with the most updated version of Chrome. So be sure to switch over now if you can. There's still time before we dive into the report. And most importantly, just, sit back, enjoy and relax. Let's stretch ourselves like in the picture right here and just enjoy.
Got to be limber for all this data, right? All right, here are our new CMX community values. These values are made for the community, by the community. They are be generous, be groundbreaking, be actively inclusive. It was so fun coming up with these.
Oh yes, our goals. Our goals are very important. The goal of CMX is for each attendee to walk away with three main things: to connect, to learn, and to advocate. So first, with connecting, we want you to meet your fellow community professionals. Everyone here, please drop your LinkedIn profile in the chat so we can all add each other and become a big, huge family. Then we want you to have one actionable thing that you can take away from today and implement. We can promise that with the insights from today, you will have a plethora of action items. Is it plethora or is it plethora? I never know. Myriad. A bunch of many actionable items. And number three, let's advocate for and grow this community so that we can all thrive. Each of your successes is our success too. Back to you.
All right, our CMX events are powered by Bevy, a software company made by community managers for community managers. Everything you've seen so far with this event, from the RSVP page, the page we're on now, everything to the post-event survey coming your way, hint, hint, take that survey, is all done through Bevy. If you want to learn more about Bevy for your community building needs, please visit bevy.com for a demo. We're happy to help you grow.
All right, the moment you've all been waiting for and the reason why we are here today. David is a 3-time startup founder, including our beloved CMX, the world's largest and most passionate network for community professionals. That's basically everyone on this event today. We have thousands of community professionals come to CMX for support and education and community strategy. I know I'm one of them. David is an experienced community leader and has personally advised and trained hundreds of organizations in community strategy over the past decade. So today, the man, the myth, the legend, David Spinks, is finally going to share insights from the 2022 Community Industry Report. Anne-Marie, I think the only way this event could be any cooler is if David would wrap out these results and end it with a mic drop, right? All right.
Yes, definitely. And one of David's hidden talents is actually beatboxing. So, David, not to put you on the spot or anything, but there you go.
Yeah, you should say beatboxing. All right, let's welcome David.
Round of applause.
Wow. I've never had an intro just put me right on the spot like that. There will be no rapping, maybe a beatbox or two. We'll see. If the data starts getting really dry, we'll have to start beatboxing to mix it up. But thank you so much, Jen and Anne-Marie. Appreciate both of you. Appreciate the intro. And hi, everybody. Welcome to the Community Industry Report Live AMA. Very excited to be with you all. And I know sometimes there are presentations that are all data that can be pretty dry, pretty boring, but I don't think this is going to be boring at all. I don't know about all of you, but just going through all this data, seeing the report come together, I just get so excited about it. It's cool to see how this report has developed. We started doing it in 2017, and it's definitely one of those things that you do it in 2017 and all right, you get some insights about the community industry and you're not really sure if it's going to be useful or relevant or how practical it will be. But now we've been doing it for 5 years and just seeing how things have changed over the years, seeing how the community industry has developed. And for those of you who've been working in this space since 2017, just knowing how much it's changed anecdotally, but now seeing the data to back all of it up is extremely exciting. So I'm going to go through the data and some of the key insights and highlights from this year's research. Of course, if you haven't already downloaded the report, you could do that at cmxhub.com or at cmxhub.com/industry- community-industry-report. There's going to be a lot more data in the report than what I'm sharing here. But these are going to be some of the key insights and highlights. And I'll be watching the chat. So if you do have questions, please do post them in Q&A or I'll be watching what people are talking about in the chat as well. We're going to try to keep most of the questions until afterward. But if there's something really relevant in the moment, I'll see if I can answer it right away. Otherwise, let's dive in. All right. Data, methodology. So let's start with who actually took this report. So one really exciting part already is that we had 778 people participate in this survey. That's a lot bigger than any other survey that we've done before. I think it's the largest in the community industry. Our last one was about 500. So we saw a lot of growth in just the people participating in the survey, which on its own is pretty good representation that the community industry is growing, the CMX community is growing. Who took the survey? Well, we saw a pretty close to even split between B2B and B2C. A lot in the world of business. We definitely had some on education, nonprofit, some in Web3 and crypto, and some in government. And you can see here there is a kind of wide range of companies of all different sizes. There's a little bit more of a lean towards small businesses, but we had companies all across the board. If you look at the industries that companies are working in, it's very technology heavy. We definitely had some in education and nonprofits as well. But this is definitely looking pretty closely at what the community industry looks like in the world of technology. And if you look at company size based on revenue, you can also see here a pretty even spread across all different sizes. Under 1 million still being the largest, but we had 18% at over $1 billion. So lots of different size companies participating in this study. Okay, So those are some of the background demographics. There's more in the report. If you have more questions about that, let us know. So let's dive in. I'll be sharing kind of a few different sections here, and we're going to start off with the 7 key community industry trends that we identified, and I'll be sharing some of the data behind that. First off, very exciting. One of the most exciting ones of all the insights from this report is that the community management industry is definitely moving from a growth stage to a mature stage. And there's a lot of data that's proving that true. One of the most exciting ones is this stat. This one jumped out at me when we looked through the data right away. 22% of companies report having a dedicated community department, which is up from 15% last year. So this is huge. I've always been an advocate for community being its own department within the organization. I think that's where it can be the most successful and have the most impact, because community does touch so many different parts of the organization. It needs to be kind of a center of excellence, its own department, rather than live under another department. So to see more teams creating a dedicated department is huge. Now, it's still not the number 1 department. Marketing is still number 1 at 28%. Community is number 2 at 22%, which is exciting and different from previous years. Customer success is 8%. Product is 6%. Customer support, 5%. Comms, engineering, HR are all below 5%. Okay, so that's one really good signal that community industry is maturing. We also looked at what community professionals are working on in addition to community, right? So as we all know, community professionals don't always get to only wear the community hat. We often wear other hats. And so of the people who are working on other things in addition to community, so 212 people answered this question. Marketing is still the number 1, which makes sense, especially being under the marketing department. Content creation is number 2. So there's a lot of community professionals. 43% of the people who are doing something in addition to community are creating content, writing blog posts, creating emails. Content ends up falling under the community professional a lot of time. Communications more broadly, social media, which I was happy to see is just 33%. You know, we don't want to confuse community and social media. So, but some people are still managing both of those. Some people are managing product development, PR, and some even in HR and people ops. That's definitely going to be more leaning in the internal community side of things. Another really interesting stat, so 89% of communities have dedicated community managers, which is really exciting as well. That number has gone up over the years. It was very similar last year. I think we were 88% last year. But to see that high level of teams that have at least one full-time community manager running the community is great, because in previous studies, that number was a lot lower, around 70, 75% that had community professionals dedicated to running community. One interesting stat that this is the first time we asked about this was 44% of communities launch with a dedicated community manager. So this is really interesting, because that means 56% of communities are launching before they have someone full-time dedicated to it. It points to the fact that a lot of teams are just testing out community themselves, and then once they have it proven and validated, then they'll hire full-time for it. This is a really exciting one. For those of you who are working in community operations or interested in that space, this is hugely validating. 35% of community teams who took this study have at least one person dedicated to community operations full-time. This is really exciting. So, just within community, there are a lot of different hats that people wear, right? We do engagement, we create content, we are facilitating events. And so what we're starting to see now is the community professional and community team is becoming more specialized, and community operations is that first big specialty that we're seeing in the industry. Community operations professionals will manage the back end of the community. They'll analyze and track analytics. They'll manage integrations. They create more efficient processes and structures that help them scale community, right? If you're doing a community-led event program, creating that process, or any sort of leadership program, creating those processes. They're integrating community systems with CRMs and sales systems. It's a lot of incredible work that happens behind the scenes for communities that most people don't see. And it's really cool to see this becoming a specialized role in the industry. And so now we have all these different specialties. And so there are many different roles that community teams will take on within the community team now. And so so we see people engaging with the community directly as the number one thing, right? So they are participating in the community, facilitating discussions, engaging with people. This is the number one thing that community teams do. Makes sense. But then you see here, number two, 35% focuses full time on operations and processes, and 61% did it as at least part of their role. Right. So we're seeing that's 90. I'm going to be doing a lot of live math here, so bear with me. That's 96% are working on community operations either full time or as part of their role, which is really interesting to see. Next up, we have designs community products and experiences, running in-person events or virtual events, growing the community through marketing. We're seeing community marketing as a specialized role that's growing as well. Managing community governance and voting structure, which is something that's becoming big in Web3. And then develops education and training and running those chapter-based event programs. So lots of different specialties that we're starting to see develop in the community industry within the community team. And I expect over the next few years, we're going to see a lot of these percentages go up as teams become bigger and more mature and more specialized. All right. I'm loving all the comments. Keep them coming. Glad to hear all the data is exciting to you as it is to me. Oh, okay. Well, there we go. Okay, community professional salaries. I know this was a stat that a lot of you are really excited to see, and you commented on it in the chat already. So this is the first year that we gathered this data in the Community Industry Report specifically. We've gathered it in smaller studies in the past, but as far as I know, this is definitely the largest study of community professional salaries to date. And so you can see here, we broke it down by a number of different areas. And one really exciting thing that we haven't announced yet, but we're going to be sharing a sort of dashboard where you'll be able to put in all of these different factors and be able to see the different salaries that align with those factors. So by level, we broke it down in 4 levels. So community associate, community manager, director of community, and then VP/founder/exec. One caveat is that group was pretty small. We only had 27 responses there. So take that last one on the bottom there with a grain of salt, because we didn't reach statistical significance in order to say with confidence, but you can still see the trend of the salaries. It seems about right in terms of the average that we see. We also broke it down by years of experience, about 2 years, 3 to 4 years, 5 to 9 years, and 10 plus years. And so these are averages. Another thing to note is these are all US-based salaries. We did not reach enough data in other regions to have statistical significance. And because salary is so driven by location, we wanted to make sure that that data was as accurate as possible. So these are US-based salaries. We also broke it down by whether or not you're a manager. So this is pretty consistent in all industries. For better or for worse, becoming a manager is a way to get paid more. We're seeing that in the community industries. So anyone who manages employees or contractors, on average, are paid $134,000. Anyone who doesn't manage people is $95,000 on average. Now, like, of course, earlier stage people in their career are less likely to manage people and more likely to have a lower salary. So just keep that in mind. But it's still interesting to see that management is a clear path towards growing your salary. And then based on, this is actually pretty interesting, B2B came in at $123,000 on average, B2C $112,000 on average. So community professionals working in B2B tend to get paid a bit more. They have a higher salary than community professionals working in B2C. All right, next big insight. Organizations believe in the value of community. I'm sure you've all felt it. Community is the hot thing. Everyone believes in it now, but we're all still really struggling to measure that value. And so these are the same questions we asked last year, and a lot of the metrics are pretty similar. 62% say their organization will be investing more into community in the next year. I was actually a little lower than I had hoped to see. 62% feeling confident that they're going to invest more. But we saw 82% have seen increased interest in community from other departments, which is really cool. And that also speaks to that community as a standalone department thing we were talking about before. 79% believe community has had a positive impact on their organization's objectives. And 89% agree that community is critical to their company's mission. So those are really exciting to see. There's a lot of bullishness on the future of community. Now, that all said, we asked this question last year as well. Are you able to financially quantify the business value of your community? Only 10% say that they can, with confidence, measure the business value of their community. So that actually went down from last year. Last year was 12%. So we would love to see that number go up. 55% say it's a work in progress. So it's something that the majority of us are either doing or thinking about. And 35% just flat out, no, we cannot measure the financial impact of our community. So this is a big opportunity for growth. And if we look at the top frustrations that community professionals have had over the years, this is pretty interesting. These three have been the top three frustrations every year that we've done this study. Every single year, it's the same three. Number one, it's difficult to consistently engage members, so just driving engagement in our community. Number two, it's hard to quantify the business value of the community. And number three, our efforts are largely manual and not automated. And they're not necessarily always in the same order. Number one and two tend to flip back and forth every year. But you could see number two really being that frustration of proving the business value of our work. And you could see the other frustrations that people have. So you see those top three: engaging members, 46%, hard to quantify the value of community, 38%, efforts are largely manual, not automated, 34%. But then other things also speak to this, the impact that not being able to prove that value has. Not enough staff is number 4. Not enough budget is number 5. Lacking the right tools and technology, number 6. Not able to access the data I need. All of this stuff is kind of revolving around this idea of measurement, of proving our value, of being data driven. And so this continues to be the biggest frustration. And just one note on this question, we asked survey takers, they could choose up to 3 frustrations. So they couldn't just choose a laundry list of frustrations. We all have lots of them. They had to choose their top 3, and these were the results. By the way, feel free to take lots of screenshots throughout this presentation, but all of this is also in the report, so you can find it there. I'm also going to be sharing some great images of engagement benchmarks and things like that, so you'll be able to take pictures of those as well. Going further down on the business value, so 37% of community teams have a CRM that connects their community data and their customer data. Another 37% have a CRM, but they can't connect their community data to it. And 26% don't have a CRM at all. So this is another area where if you want to prove the business value of community, we really need to figure out how to connect our systems of record for community to our systems of record for our customers. How are community members contributing to the business? So we asked, what are the members doing that are helping the business? Sharing product feedback is number 1. Writing articles or contributing content is number 2. And being an evangelist or referring people to the company is number 3. Then we have moderating forums, hosting events, participating in customer advisory boards, etc. Third insight, the community software industry market is a blue ocean and there's still no clear winners. There's a lot of players building technology for community now. Still no one platform to rule them all. First, we looked at online asynchronous platforms. So think of forums, message boards, things like that. You can see Slack is number 1, interestingly enough, because it's literally not even built to be an external community platform. It's built internally, but they still continue to be number 1 for what companies are using. Number 2 is other. So this just speaks to the wide range of tools that people are using to host their community. Number 3 are Facebook groups. Number 4 is Discord. So you see the top 3 there of specific platforms that people are using are free, out-of-the-box platforms where you don't have a lot of control or ability to access data. And so it's interesting to see a lot of companies still using these kind of free entry-level tools rather than custom tools or white label tools, right? LinkedIn is up pretty high. Then we get into Khoros, Salesforce, Discourse, Higher Logic, some of the more white label tools. We also asked what platforms you're most satisfied with. And what's interesting is a lot of the platforms people are most satisfied with are those white label tools, not necessarily the free ones. Khoros came in at number 1 with 57% being extremely satisfied. Discourse came in at number 2 with 50% being extremely satisfied or very satisfied. And Discord came in at number 3, then Slack, people with custom solutions, Facebook group, LinkedIn, and then Salesforce Community Cloud. We looked at what community teams are using to host events as well. And you can see right here in the middle, Zoom is still dominating. 73% of community teams are using Zoom to host their virtual events. After that, it's pretty spread out. Bevy at 13%. Bevy is our own product that we use here at CMX. And that's what you're using here today. Google Hangouts is number 4, has 14%. Eventbrite, Hopin, Microsoft Teams, Meetup. So we're seeing a pretty widespread, and then 29% said other. So still a lot of different tools and a huge opportunity for someone to come in and really build the community platform for events. 43% of community teams are now using what we call a community operations tool. So this is a new trend. These tools have really only come out in the last couple of years. And so we had never asked about this in previous studies. And it's pretty interesting to see with the rise of community operations teams and professionals in that specialty, we're also seeing the rise of community operations technology. And so there are a few popular tools that people use. Number 1 has been Orbit. Number 2 has been Common Room. Number 3 and 4 are ComSoar and Dots. 27% said other. And those other responses commonly included actually more of the traditional CRM tools. So like Salesforce, HubSpot, and Marketo. So a lot of community teams still have not adopted this new wave of community operations tools. And the difference is Marketo, Salesforce, HubSpot, they're really like sales and marketing CRMs. They're really for tracking the customer experience or the sales pipeline. These community tools are really built especially for communities. So you can track who is in your community, who's becoming more engaged, who's becoming less engaged. You can automate community processes. You can connect that data to other systems. You can track overall engagement in your community. And the idea is they pull in data from all of your different community spaces and events and whatever platforms you want to. So I'm really excited to see this space develop. It's been a long time coming, in my opinion. And I expect to see next year, we'll see a lot more than 47% of companies using these tools. Number 4 insight, in-person is making a comeback and virtual is here to stay. So we asked, what kind of events did you host for your community in 2021? No surprise, 90% of companies hosted a virtual event in 2021. But actually somewhat surprising, 29% hosted an in-person event, and 28% hosted a hybrid event. So despite COVID having a lot of big surges, companies were still hosting in-person and hybrid events to the extent that they were able to. What team is responsible for managing your community's virtual events? So we saw community management as number 1, which makes sense. It's a community management survey. I'm sure if it was a marketing survey, marketing would be popular here, but it's still interesting to see that what community teams report is that they are primarily the ones that are responsible for running events. Of course, an event team is also running it, community members and volunteers, which we're going to get into next, demand generation or marketing, field marketing are all running events. So this has been an interesting thing I've heard more and more from companies as community programs are becoming increasingly event driven, is like companies host a lot of events. Marketing hosts events, community hosts events, HR and people ops host events, customer service hosts events. Everyone's hosting events, but they're all doing it in separate ways, sometimes using different tools, using different systems with different processes. So it'll be interesting to see if community continues to grow as kind of the center of excellence for events, because events are community experiences. This is a community experience, right? Look at all of you chatting up in the chat there. Like, this is community, so it's cool to see community teams really taking that responsibility. We asked, when it's safe to gather in person, do you plan to host more or less virtual events? So try to get an understanding of where things are going. So this data is actually pretty interesting. 15% said they are planning to host more virtual events. 57% said they plan on hosting the same amount. 28% said they plan on hosting fewer. So what this tells me, as someone who's like trying to interpret and analyze this data, is there's going to be a decline. There's going to be a pretty significant decline, because even the 15% who say they're going to do more virtual events may just be optimistic, right? Like the fact that 57% say they're going to do the same and 28% said they're going to do fewer tells me that people are going to start doing less virtual as soon as they can. And my opinion, my take, just tweeted this out the other day, in real life events, in-person events are about to take the world by storm. You can just feel it, right? Like people are hungry for it. COVID looks like maybe we finally reached the end of the worst parts of it. Mandates are disappearing. You just feel like in-person is about to just blow up. And I think community teams are going to be going haywire with in-person events. And this stat, 78% of those who did not host a hybrid event in 2021 plan to do so when it's safe to gather. So we're going to see hybrid and in-person just blow up. CMX Summit coming in hot. It's going to be dope. I can't wait. Okay. On average, what percentage of people who RSVP to your virtual events end up attending an event? This is like the question that everyone always asks. Like, all right, I have 1,000 RSVPs. How many people are actually going to show up to my virtual event? Well, we have data on it now. For the first time, we asked this question. Unfortunately, there's still no clear answer. You're pretty safe in the range of about 30% to 70%. You can see here the 30 to 40% is the most popular. That's about what we see with CMX. We see about we're more in the 40 to 50% or 50 to 60% because y'all are awesome and you actually show up to our events. Yeah, we got 161 here today and so far, and I think we had almost 400. So we're at like the 40% for this one. So we're going to continue to track this data, but this gives you an idea of how many people you can expect to come to your events. And I'll have a lot more benchmark data for you like that soon. Okay, number 5, community-led events are gaining in popularity. So this is really cool to see. We asked, what best describes how you manage your events? Are they HQ-led, which means your team runs the events, community-led, which means community members are self-organizing events, or is it a mix of both? And we saw here 44% are either community-led only or a mix of both. 56% run all of the events themselves. So it's pretty cool to see about half of companies, of community teams, are starting to empower their community members to self-organize events on their behalf. This is a trend we've seen for a long time. It's one I've been bullish on for a very long time, which is why I was so excited about Bevy and part of why the acquisition happened. And when I met with Derek Anderson, I was like, yes, trust me, this is going to happen. It's a huge way to scale your community and provide people with intimate, local, small group experiences, even at global scale. And now we're seeing 49% of those who haven't done it yet plan to do so in 2021. So this is going to be a huge trend. And if you're building your community strategy for the rest of the year, something to maybe think about is how do you empower your community members to self-organize events? We have a lot of good benchmark data here. How many active hosts do you have? So you can see most of these programs are still on the smaller side, only 1 to 4 hosts. After that, it spreads out, but 5% have over 1,000 hosts, right? So we're seeing programs reach a pretty incredible size. Same thing if we look at it based on chapters rather than just hosts, because sometimes chapters have lots of different hosts, 20% at 1 to 4, but 8% at 250 to 1,000 chapters, 2% at 1,000 plus. And we ask, how long has your community had community-led chapters? And so we see some of these programs have been doing it for a very long time, 15 plus years. There's actually like no real specific timeline here. So there are lots of new companies trying it for the first time and companies who have pretty mature programs. And one thing we're going to share after this as well is breaking down those last 2 stats on number of chapters and hosts based on the amount of time. So you can get some benchmarks about, how many hosts or chapters should you aim to have as your program grows. Number 6, communities are cautiously dipping their toes into Web 3.0. So for those of you who are still learning about Web 3.0 or not familiar, Web 3.0 basically is a catch-all term for the blockchain, crypto, decentralization. I know like there's like some people are like, screw that. It sounds awful and scammy and really terrible and financially driven. And others feel like it's really exciting. And I personally staying very open-minded to it and getting more and more involved in it, because I think there's some really interesting dynamics in it in terms of giving community members ownership, actual ownership in your community, where they have voting power, they have influence in the community that's actually tracked, not just like felt influence, but literal influence based on ownership, and have financial upside. We can monetize communities in a big way, which, as you can see, proving the value of community has been extremely hard. So there's a lot of things I'm excited about in this space, and we are curious to see how community teams are starting to think about this space. So yes, is your company working on any projects related to Web 3.0 or crypto? 4% said it's their primary focus, so they are like Web3 native. 11% said they're working on a Web3 project, but it's not their primary focus. 17% are considering it, which is pretty interesting to see. And 68% say not something they're considering yet. Of the people who said they are working on it or considering it, what kind of Web 3.0 community are you building? 64% said they're working on a DAO, which stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which basically means like a company or an organization that the community owns and runs, in theory. They're usually not fully decentralized, but the idea is it's a decentralized, community-owned, community-run business. NFTs, non-fungible tokens. I'm sure you've seen lots of profile pictures on Twitter and people buying essentially digital art. So a lot of companies are starting to launch NFT projects. DeFi is decentralized finance. This is deeper crypto. I don't imagine a lot of Web 2 community teams launching DeFi projects, but we see it's still pretty prominent amongst these groups. And then 16% said other. On the topic of community ownership, we also have been seeing anecdotally a trend of more companies and communities inviting community members to invest in the company and gain ownership that way. So we wanted to get a benchmark this year of how many companies are doing this. 7% said they have done it. 8% said no, but they're actively considering it. 15% said they're open to it. And 70% said they're not considering it. So 30% are either doing it or open to raising money, inviting community members to invest in their next round or in a community-led round. And it's cool. There's actually some new products and stuff being built just for this model. So another cool way that you might invite your community to really invest and have ownership in your community is to invite them into your next fundraise. All right, number 7. Community programs are increasingly focused on driving growth. So this is another really cool trend that we're seeing in the community industry. Historically, community has always been about like the support forum, but I've always been bullish and believed that as community matures, it will start to become seen as a growth engine, not just a cost center. And we're actually seeing that in the data now. So 19% of community programs are focused on acquisition. We use a spaces model for this. I'll run through that in a sec, but focus on acquisition as their top objective, up from 13% last year, right? So the spaces model, if you're not familiar with it, it's like our most popular framework at CMX. It's how you measure the business value of community. It stands for support, product, acquisition, contribution, engagement, and success. So that's how we break down this study when we ask companies about their business objectives. And you can see here that customer support and customer success are still the most common top objectives. But acquisition has been moving up. Customer retention is up there as well. Content creation is up there. Product feedback's an interesting one because you could see only 5% said that it's their top objective, but pretty high at 49% say that it's an objective. So while it's not the top, a lot of companies are still focusing on it, right? And we asked in the survey, which objectives are you focused on, as you know, all of the objectives you're focused on, and then which one is your top objective, so we can really hone in. If you look at the comparison between last year and this year, so support still number one, but you can see it went down a little bit. Number two is success. Last year was external engagement, which is what we called retention. We're working on the language in the survey each year to make it a little bit more explicit because sometimes people don't know what external engagement. So that was retention this year. And then 2022 acquisition came in at number three for the first time at 19%, and success was number three last year. I'm not going to go through this one in detail, but you can take a screenshot or see it in the report. And I just want to make sure you're aware that what we also ask for is what are the top 3 metrics you track for your top objective. And so this gives you an idea of what are the metrics that community teams are tracking in order to measure the business value of their community. All right. Okay, so those were the top 7 insights. And then there's so much data in this one. I couldn't just stop there. So I'm going to give you some of these community program and engagement benchmarks, data points, and then we'll open up for questions. All right. So first thing is, what stage are communities in? So they're coming in at all different ranges, all different stages. And so what we're actually seeing in 2022 is more communities are building a new community. Less communities are scaling in existing communities. So we're seeing a lot of new communities enter the space. And then this stat was actually pretty big. If you see all the way to the right, that 21% are revitalizing a community compared to 9% and 10% in previous years. So it's pretty interesting. It seems like a lot of companies that maybe launched communities in the last few years or a long time ago, but it kind of died. Now they're really trying to focus on revitalizing it as communities becoming a big thing. We asked what kind of community programs organizations are hosting. No surprise, 90% are doing some sort of asynchronous space like an online forum, chat room, or message board. 75% are doing events. 35% are doing community advocacy programs. 26 have a CAB, a customer advisory board, and 11% had different kinds of programs. How you manage your online forums and message boards. So 38% have only full-time staff running their community. 14% have it community-led, so the community is entirely running the forum or message board, and 44% have a mix of both in-house moderators and community managers, as well as community members. This was pretty interesting. We wondered how communities are starting. Do community teams usually start by launching an event or launching a forum? It's kind of a big question for a lot of teams, right? Like, events are easier to test and iterate and get up quickly and run an experiment. A forum, once you launch it, it's kind of heavy and it's there forever. That said, most companies are still launching their community as a forum or message board, async only, 60%. 22% launch with a event only, and then 18% have done both. If we look at what community programs look like today, 90% are async, 75% have sync experiences. We got some really good benchmarks this year on how healthy community teams believe their community to be, which is really cool because that's going to start to give us an idea of what goes into having a healthy community. So if you're worried about the health of your community and you think it's not perfect, turns out you're not alone. 51% rated their community as somewhat healthy. Only 40% said extremely healthy or very healthy, but very few think it's not healthy at all. So only 9%. We also were curious, how are you measuring that health? And we'll have more stats on that next. But first, starting off with a health survey, how often do you send a health survey? Only 53% of community teams are sending a community health survey, which is pretty interesting. I think that number should go up a lot. It's really important to be surveying and collecting that data from your community. The majority do it once per year. And then you see it's kind of evenly spread between other intervals. If we look at what metrics community teams are using to measure the health of their community, there's actually like 20 that people listed. You can see that full in the report. The top 5 were number of active members, total members, number of new members, number of posts, and number of event attendees. So pretty interesting to see that all the metrics that community teams are using to track their community health are very much around that kind of like growth total activity numbers. This is one of those benchmark slides that you can take a screenshot of if you want to. You can also see it in the report. So this was how engagement rate varies by community size. So we wanted to see that, like, as a community grows, is it true that community engagement percentage goes down, right? Because if you have 100 members and 50 are active, then that's 50% engagement. If you have 10,000 and you only have 100 that are active, obviously that percentage is lower. We didn't really see that in the end. What you can see here is that it pretty much levels off around 20 to 30%. Even small communities and large communities are seeing that about 20 to 30% range are active in the community. We also looked at community size varying based on the age of community to give you an idea of, like, all right, like, what should my goal be for the total size of my community over the years? And you could see a bit of a trend here as you move forward. So within 1 year, communities generally get to about 100 to 1,000 members. In 1 to 2 years, they get up to closer to 1,000 to 10,000. Only after about 5 to 9 years are they really reaching into that 10,000 plus number. And then it kind of, you don't really see too many trends after that. And then finally, we also were curious about moderators. Like, how many moderators do you need for your community? Does it just keep growing as your community scales? And you can see here, it does kind of grow in that later end, but up to about 500,000 members, most communities only have 2 to 4 moderators. So it just points out that you don't need a lot of moderators to really scale your community. Once you get to that 500 plus range, then you're getting more into 10 to 20 moderators, but you can get a long way with just 2 to 4 moderators that are really good leading your community. Also interesting, 14% of their companies pay their moderators. The rest are all volunteer led, which segues into the Web3 conversation as well as an opportunity to maybe be able to better compensate those people. We asked, how are you rewarding your community members who make a positive impact? So public recognition, big one, swag and gifts. Obviously, everyone loves swag. Access to team members or experts is a big reward. Invitations to exclusive events and digital badges. Those are the top 5 ways to reward community members. And this last insight here on community programs. Last year when we did this study was right in the heart of the BLM movement and George Floyd's murder. And we started asking about how community teams are investing in DEI. When we asked this question this year, how many community programs have DEI specific goals, only 50% have goals that are specifically tied to DEI. So I think this is a really big opportunity for us to improve the health of our communities, and we'd love to see this number go up over the next year. All right, I want to open up to questions, so I'm just going to pull these up for you to see. These are just 10 insights that are correlated. We can't say that if you do this, you're going to be successful, but of the communities that said that they are highly successful, this is what the data showed is correlated with that success. All right, so things like dedicating at least a full-time community manager, provide a variety of paths for community members to contribute, make community dedicated department in your company, setting specific DEI goals. These are all things that companies who said they do these things have a higher likelihood of being successful. All right, so it's another one you could screenshot and see if there are opportunities here for you to be able to improve how you build your communities. All right, so that's it. Let's open it up for questions. But just again, here's a link. If you haven't already downloaded the report, go ahead and download it, share it, spread it far and wide. It's free. We hope it helps you all build better communities.
All right, thank you so much, David, for all of this. There is a huge lineup of questions. We're having difficulty keeping them up, so if you don't get your question answered, let's just move this as well to our Slack channel where we can all continue with that. So I'm going to start with, I have her right here. Elizabeth Kinsey has the question. We're going to open the gates with her. David, what do you think about industry hiring right now? Has the shift to growth made it easier or harder to hire or be hired, especially when coupled with the Great Resignation?
Hmm. I think what I'm seeing is that there is difficulty hiring at more senior levels of community. I think we're seeing the community industry grow a lot. And so a lot of people are entering the space. But finding people who have been doing this work for a long time and can work at a more executive or senior level has been pretty difficult for companies. So, folks who have been at CMX for the last 8 years, you're in a good spot. I think there's more competition for entry level community positions, but the demand overall has never been higher in what I'm seeing. And then you look at Web3 and wow, are they desperate for really good community talent, and they're willing to pay for it. So I think for getting community jobs, the future is very bright.
Okay, next we have Elna Miller. What about salaries by region?
Yeah, so we are going to be publishing more specific regional based salaries in a follow-up post, and it will be in that dashboard. So we didn't share all of the salary data we had in the report. When I tell you that the amount of data we had to work with was just like size of Mount Everest, and we had to really condense it into like what are the most important things to include in the report. That's what we did, but we want to provide more salary transparency and location-based data. So we're going to be able to break it down by regions within the US. And my hope is to be able to share salary data from other countries. The only caveat is we don't have a ton of data to be able to say that it's statistically significant, but we'll share what we have, and all of that data is going to be made available to you publicly.
Yes, I know that I'm living in Europe. It would be super helpful for us. The salary differences in Europe are half of what are the averages in the US. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, totally.
All right, next we have Marissa Book. How can communities better financially quantify their business value?
Yeah, this Spaces model. Go this Spaces model. I saw someone posted it in the chat here, or just Google CMX Spaces model. The key is to start with what is the business value that you're trying to drive before you build a community. If you build a community and then later try to figure out what is the value of it, it's a lot harder, right? Because the kind of community program you're going to run to drive growth and acquisition is going to be very different than a community program you run to drive support or success. So just lead with a very clear understanding and get alignment amongst your team and executives and leaders around here's a business goal we're going to drive, use the Spaces model to define that, and then specifically build the community programs that will help you achieve that business goal.
Okay, going back to salaries, Matthew Pearsall is asking, do you have information on salaries for folks who are a one-person team?
Good question. We can get that. We'll take a note to publish that data. I don't have that stat offhand, but we have the data that we can pull for that.
Okay, next question is from Diane. Hi, Diane. It's a long one, so bear with me. What would be the benefit to using a community-focused CRM over a sales-focused CRM like Salesforce? Our community platform just happens to have an integration with Salesforce, which goes hand in hand with tracking that proves the value of the community through a sales lens. Would a community-focused CRM be better?
Great question. Of course, Diane has a great question. Hi, Diane. So you should use both. Salesforce is really specifically built for measuring the value of community. And so what you can do is put in your community touch points that essentially become part of the sales and the customer pipeline or journey. So anytime someone attends an event, anytime someone joins a community or becomes active in the community, anytime someone downloads a community report, all of these different kinds of community actions become touch points that you port into Salesforce. And so you could generate a report and say, of all the leads we've driven, of all the opportunities we have, the SAL, sales accepted leads, and closed won opportunities, here were the amount that community influenced, and here are the amount that community sourced, which means it was the first touch. That's what Salesforce does really well. What Salesforce won't do is tell you Who's active in your community? Who's active in multiple spaces in your community? How do we automate a survey to go out to our members after they join 4 weeks later? Who's becoming more inactive over time? Who's got a lot of potential to be a leader or an advocate in the community? How do we moderate the community at scale? How do we automate some of our onboarding processes? These are all things that some of these community operations tools do really well. And I'll just say that the holy grail will be when those two work really well. So the community operations tool can identify the point at which somebody becomes an active, engaged member, and that becomes a touch point in Salesforce. So now you can say how engagement, not just joining the community, but engagement in the community leads someone to make a buying or a renewal decision.
Thanks, David. All right, we have Marissa back with 2 questions this time. Question number 1, how can community managers better support customer retention? And question number 2, how can community managers better leverage their communities for content creation?
Great question. So for retention, again, it's going to depend if you're B2B or B2C, right? A consumer retention is going to look different than B2B retention. In B2B, you're really looking at providing, community experiences that connect customers to each other. Usually there's a big education focus. So maybe it's a cohort-based course or somewhere where you're teaching them how to be more successful at using the product and teaching them strategy. And just by nature of being an engaged member of your community, in theory, should increase retention. And what other companies have done is at least show the correlation to say members who are active in our community are X% more likely to renew than members who are not. It's similar in B2C in the idea that if you engage people through community, does that increase the likelihood that they continue to use your product, to come back and purchase again? Does their product adoption rate go up? Like, are they using your product in more effective ways? And so just focus on education and that kind of emotional support that your customers will need. On content creation, community is really, really good for this in a couple ways. One is you don't even need the community members to necessarily create the content. Just by nature of being engaged in your community, you can identify topics and themes that are really valuable that you can turn into content. Finimize is a really good example of a company that does this. The community team and the content team meets every week. They extract, here are the top themes and topics that people are discussing in the community, and they turn that into a newsletter or report. Then you can take it a step farther and open up an opportunity for your community members to contribute content. You can have them write articles, you can have them host events, any sort of content you want to create. You probably have experts in your community that you can empower to create that content.
Thanks, David. All right, next with Joshua Gross. How are you seeing the definition of community changing? Do you still think it's possible to, quote unquote, control where your community takes place?
It's never been possible to control where your community takes place. Your community members are going to do what they're going to do. What you can do is influence it and be present in it. And if you're present in it, then you can, then you have influence, right? If you're not there, you have no influence. If you're there and you're building relationships, then you can influence the direction it's going. Is the definition changing? I don't think so. I mean, I think community's always been a very loosely defined term, which is both what makes it exciting and beautiful and also really stressful. So a lot of the work I do when I work with companies is start by just defining what is community to them. What do they mean? Who are they talking about? And I think just because community has become so hyped, it's used in a lot of different ways to describe audiences, or it can be very buzzy. So it's more important than ever to really define community before you dive into building it.
All right. Elna Miller is back with the question. How many companies have a mixture of in-person community programs, for instance, user groups, customer-led events with online communities?
We did share that data. I think it was 90% had online forum-based or message board-based communities, and about 75% were doing event-based or live in-person communities.
All right, moving on to Ryan Francis. What do you advise people do with charging for hybrid events if you did not charge for virtual events over the past 2 years?
It's going to be a lot more reasonable to charge for in-person events. I think people still expect that, and especially if it's a big conference that's highly produced, like we're going to be charging our regular price tickets for CMX Summit in person. Do you charge for the virtual part? That's up to you and your goals. Do you want a lot more people to engage, but probably have a lower engagement rate? Or do you want to have less people engage and bring in some revenue through it, and have those people be a higher percentage of them be more engaged? I think like the default for us will be paid if you want to be there in person, free if you want to be there online.
Okay, Jenny Asaba asks, what's the single biggest surprise you discovered in survey responses?
Yeah, there's so many. That's pretty much what made those top 7 insights. There's like every time I was like, oh shit, that's cool. That became like a top insight. Yeah, I mean, I think just seeing the community department was probably the biggest one that jumped out at me. I wasn't expected that much growth in that metric, and it just really jumped out to me as proof that the community industry is maturing.
Okay. Aaron White is asking, do you see community managers advancing in their careers largely through internal promotion or by changing employers?
Frankly, this is true for every industry. Some companies are really good at internal progression for people's career paths. Sometimes people start as a junior level employee and like can't shake that stigma of, you know, being perceived as junior level within the org, and they don't have like a manager or a leader who's empowering them and setting them up to be a leader, right? Like they need that support from above. And so it depends on the company. And if you're feeling stuck and you don't feel like you have the support to move up, then sometimes the best thing to do is to move to another company where you get to start fresh, renegotiate your salary, your role. It's a pretty common thing, but I don't have data on which one has been more effective for community professionals. I only have like anecdotal evidence.
Yes, on average, I had read an article somewhere that had said you can increase your salary by up to 15% at each company move. So.
Totally. Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because there's trade-offs to it too. When you switch companies, you're sacrificing some things like existing relationships and like your reputation and the things that you've developed and set up within your company, and you give up the ability to have longevity, which I think is important to the extent you're able to within a company, to see a company go through several cycles and like ups and downs. Like that kind of stuff is important. But absolutely, there's a point where it makes sense to switch things up, and yeah, that data sounds right to me.
Okay, Marissa, what do you think is the best way to reward community members who make a positive impact?
I mean, you know, you can look at the data that was shared there, and you know, we talk about rewarding community members a lot, and it comes down to making sure that their primary motivation is intrinsic, but you are being thorough about rewarding them and thanking them and making them feel appreciated for their work. So I don't think there's one right answer. It's different for every kind of contribution. Sometimes just a personal message saying thank you can go a really long way. Sometimes you should be paying people because they're doing an amount of work that justifies compensation. So just looking at who your members are and what kind of rewards work for them, right? Like what's their love language, and reward them in a way that's going to resonate with them.
Okay, Oliver Edwards. I decided to use Slack to start building our community. Oops, excuse me. I decided to use Slack to start building our community, as I have the feeling that this is exactly where our target group already is. Slack is no community tool though. What options do I have to combine Slack with another platform without ripping the community apart?
Yeah, it's a tough challenge I think a lot of community teams go through, especially as you saw how popular Slack is. And if you're on the free tool and the free version, which you probably are, because it makes no sense to pay for that level of number of members, then you're losing the content in the Slack. You have basically two options in these scenarios. One is to migrate, one is to just launch another community that lives side by side. Both can work. In my experience, we've tried both. We started with a Facebook group, and the community for CMX actually started the Slack. And what we actually see there is a pretty different group of people participates in each space based on like who's more used to using Facebook and who's more used to using Slack. We launched a different community space that was more owned, and it was really hard to get people to participate there because the free platforms are so engaging because they're already there and they're already getting so much value out of them. It was hard to migrate. So if you're going to move from from Slack to an owned platform, something like Discourse or Circle or Choros or any of those tools that you saw in there, I would recommend either making sure that that different space has a very unique purpose from the free space. Maybe it's a different group of people that you're focusing on, a different kind of engagement, or you actually fully migrate. You shut down the Slack gradually. You don't do it overnight, but you migrate members into the new space. That way you can really keep your community focused and centralized in one place. That said, your community members may still launch another Slack like ours did, or launch a Facebook group or Reddit subreddit. And you just kind of have to figure out what's right for your community.
Okay, we have Hannah Rafter here asking, any good resources for a community health survey? And Kathy Liu, follow up to that, what are the tools you recommend to measure community health?
Totally. Yeah, there's a really great set of articles. I shared one of the links here in the chat written by Beth McIntyre, our Director of Community, that lays out exactly how we run community health surveys. We also share the results publicly from our community health surveys, and we just share the actual questions we ask and how we ask them. So you can just copy all of that. Just either find that in the chat or Google CMX Community Health Survey, and you'll find that there. And other tools, I don't know, we use, standard survey tools. You can use Typeform, Google Forms, things like that. There are some people that go really hard on things like this sense of community index, which is a more academic way of measuring the health of community. And that comes with the sense of community theory is a theory, and the index is the survey that you can send and analyze it. So that's another one you can check out.
All right, let's move on to Dimple Mathradas. Any info on building community on Discord for NFT projects?
Yeah, this is a hot topic. My thinking on this, I think, changes like every week. My current thinking is that like NFT communities are largely nonsense, simply because the people in the group don't have anything in common with each other than they've like recently heard about this artist, and it's usually very financially driven. There are some communities that I think have done a really good job. They're far and few between. The things I'd say they do really well are, one, they don't optimize for selling out from day one. They optimize for building community. They don't care if they get 10,000 members in there. They care about getting the first 10 and then 50 and then 100 of the right people. They don't talk about price in the community, and they actively encourage members to not talk about price and really focus on art and creation and supporting each other. They invest in DEI. Crypto Coven is a really good one that from day one really made DEI a priority. You could see it in their art. You could see it in their content, in their values. And they have a moderation policy to actually hold members to that. Communities will also just have a good steady cadence of quality partnerships and announcements and new art and new projects to keep the community excited and engaged. For better or for worse, NFT communities are very much about buzz and hype. And so it's really important that you have that steady cadence of things for people to be excited about.
Okay, we're gonna ask the last question here, and it's by Nicolette, and this touches on the platforms. I know in the report you had said that even though a platform is the highest rated, doesn't mean it's the most used. And so Nicolette asks, is there one community platform you recommend over the other?
No. It is a very much it depends kind of question. Depends on what your business goal. Are you doing a support forum then or success forum? You might use a tool like Insighted or Khoros. If it's more of an interest based group, then you might use Circle or a Facebook group or Slack. It depends where your community members are. It depends on how comfortable they are with different forms of technology. There's a full technology audit process that you can and should go through. Actually, if you look up the CMX Guide to Community Platforms, the report itself is old in terms of the platforms listed there, but we have a whole process for how to select the right platform for your community. And I recommend just being really thorough about that, not looking for like the one perfect platform that everyone recommends, and really just looking at like what are the non-negotiables and the most important things for you, and choose a community based on that. Data integration is another big one, right? Like Facebook groups are getting a lot of engagement, but there's no way you're going to connect it to Salesforce or anything where you'll be able to measure the business value. So you just have to choose the right one for your company at the right time.
Okay, that closes out the industry report. There are so many questions. Again, we can take that conversation and continue it on the Slack channel or on our Facebook. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to David for all of this information. It's great. It's something that we all should take with us and like we mentioned in the introduction to apply to our lives and to our work and make it better. Go ahead and as well, we encourage you to download the report so that you have it with you and you can always go back to and use it for best practices as well for your community. And please, if you could stay, we have networking activity right now for the next 30 minutes, if you can, and we can continue that conversation there. David, any last beatboxing, rapping words you would like to say?
All right, I'll give you a quick beatbox, right? There you go. That's the best I can do. Closing words. No, just thank you all for being here. Thank you for all the questions. My DMs are open on Twitter. Just feel free to send me more questions you have. Maybe I'll just post like something on there and you can ask them publicly so others can see as well. And appreciate all of you. Appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. Like all the progress you're seeing in the industry, all of this data is a direct result of the hard work that you all put in every day, not just to build your own communities, but to share and teach each other what you're learning and to help advance the community industry with us at CMX. So just thank you for building community. Thanks for the work you do. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.